In the 4th millennium, somewhere beyond the borders of peaceful Ether, at a time when the Twin Guardians had maintained harmony for 3 centuries, I discovered that our greatest victory had planted the seeds of an even greater challenge. My name is still Theron Drakkart, though I am no longer the young Guardian who first took up 300 years have passed since Malakar's redemption, and the sacred flame has changed me in ways I could never have imagined. My mortal flesh has been transformed by the eternal light, granting me the long life necessary to fulfill my duties as Guardian. Yet with this gift came a burden I had not foreseen, the weight of watching generations pass while I remained. But this tale is not about the melancholy of immortality. It is about the day I learned that Malakar and I were not the only Guardians in existence, and that our actions in Ether had sent ripples across the cosmic tapestry that would soon return to us as a tsunami of consequences. The revelation came through Lysa Munisper, a young sorceress from the distant realm of Valdris Prime. I remember her arrival clearly. It was during the Festival of Eternal Light, when all 5 kingdoms gathered at our citadel to celebrate the anniversary of the Twin Guardians' first victory. The air shimmered with magical energy as thousands of people filled the courtyards, their laughter and songs creating a symphony of joy that warmed even my ancient heart. Lysa appeared not through any conventional means of travel, but by tearing a hole in reality itself. One moment, the main courtyard was filled with dancing celebrants. The next, a rift of crackling energy split the air, and through it stepped a figure that made my blood run cold with recognition. She was tall and elegant, with silver hair that seemed to hold starlight and eyes, the color of storm clouds. But it was not her appearance that struck me. It was the weapon she carried. In her hands was a staff that pulsed with the same fundamental energy as Dawnbreaker and Shadowmend, clearly forged from the same divine source. Twin Guardians of Ether, I am Lysa Moonwhisper, keeper of the astral flame of Valdris Prime, and I bring urgent news. Your redemption of the Shadow Lord has shattered the ancient barriers between realms, and darkness stirs in places that have known only light for millennia. Malakar appeared beside me in a swirl of controlled shadows, his face grave. Over the centuries, we had learned to communicate through our bond as Twin Guardians, and I could feel his concern matching my own. Speak your message, Sister Guardian, Malakar said, for we had both recognized what she was, another like us, charged with protecting one of the fundamental forces of creation. Lysa's expression was grim as she began her tale. 300 years ago, when you chose redemption over destruction, your actions created what we call the Great Resonance. Every sacred flame across all the realms felt the change, and with it came both blessing and curse. The blessing was that many who had fallen to darkness found hope for redemption. The curse was that ancient seals began to weaken, barriers that had held back threats, far worse than any single Shadow Lord. She gestured with her staff, and illusions filled the air around us. Images of other realms, other guardians, other sacred flames. I saw a volcanic world where a guardian with obsidian skin wielded a hammer that blazed within a fire. I saw a realm of floating islands where a winged guardian commanded winds that carried the essence of pure light. I saw underwater cities where guardians with scales and gills protected flames that burned even beneath the deepest oceans. There are 12 sacred flames in total, Lysa continued, each guarding a different aspect of creation: light, shadow, fire, water, earth, air, life, death, time, space, mind, and spirit. For ions, we Guardians have maintained the balance separately, each protecting our own realm, but the Great Resonance has changed everything. The images shifted, showing realms consumed by chaos. I saw the Fire Realm where volcanoes erupted endlessly, spewing forth creatures of living magma that devoured everything in their path. I saw the Water Realm where tsunamis the size of mountains crashed across continents, carrying with them leviathans that had slumbered in the deepest trenches since the dawn of time. The Ancient Ones stir, Lysa said. Beings that existed before the first sacred flames were lit. Creatures of pure entropy that seek to return all of creation to the primordial void. They were bound by the combined power of all 12 guardians working in unity, but that unity was broken long ago by fear and pride. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. What do you mean, broken? After the first war between light and shadow, the one that created the original need for guardians, we 12 scattered to our individual realms. Each became convinced that their aspect of creation was the most important, the most worthy of protection. We built barriers not just against darkness, but against each other. The Fire Guardian believed that only through destruction could true creation occur. The Death Guardian argued that only by embracing endings could new beginnings be found. The Time Guardian insisted that all moments were equally valid and none should be changed. The illusions showed the gradual isolation of the realms, the growing mistrust between guardians who had once been allies. I watched as magnificent cities were abandoned, as trade routes between worlds closed, as the very stars seemed to dim with the loss of cooperation. But your choice to redeem rather than destroy created a resonance that reminded all the flames of their original purpose, Lysa continued. For the first time in millennia, the barriers between realms weakened, not through corruption, but through hope. And that hope awakened things that were better left sleeping. She waved her staff again, and the most terrifying image yet filled the air. It was a realm of absolute nothingness, not darkness, for darkness implied the absence of light, but true void. Within that void, I could sense movement, intelligence, hunger. The ancient ones she spoke of were not beings in any sense I could understand, but rather the personification of entropy itself, forces that sought to unmake everything that had ever been created. They call themselves the Unmakers, Lysa said, and they have begun to breach the weakened barriers. 3 realms have already fallen. The realm of echoes, where sound was protected, has become a place of absolute silence. The realm of dreams, where the Guardian protected the boundary between sleeping and waking, has become a nightmare from which none can wake. And most terrifyingly, the realm of memory has been consumed, meaning that entire civilizations are being forgotten, as if they never existed at all. The weight of this revelation settled on me like a physical force. Our victory, our moment of greatest triumph, had inadvertently weakened the very foundations of reality itself. I felt Malakar's hand on my shoulder, and through our bond, I sensed his determination. "What would you have us do?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "The 12 Guardians must unite again," Lysa replied. "Not as we were before, suspicious and isolated, but as you two have become, working in harmony, understanding that our individual aspects are parts of a greater whole. Only by combining all 12 sacred flames can we hope to repair the barriers and reseal the ancient ones." "And if the other Guardians refuse?" Malakar asked, his voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom. "Then all of existence ends," Lysa said simply. "The Unmakers will consume realm after realm until nothing remains but the void they emerged from. Creation itself will be as if it never was." That night, as the festival continued around us with forced cheerfulness, for we had decided not to share this dark news until we had a plan, the 3 of us met in the chamber of the sacred flame. The light seemed dimmer somehow, as if it sensed the magnitude of the threat we faced. "I must ask," I said to Lysa, "why come to us first? Surely the other Guardians are more powerful, more experienced." Lysa smiled sadly. "Because you, to represent something the rest of us have forgotten, the possibility of change, of growth, of becoming more than what we were created to be. The Fire Guardian, Pyrax, the Eternal, has burned in his volcanic realm so long that he has forgotten anything exists beyond destruction and rebirth. The Water Guardian, Nerea, the Flowing, has become so fluid in her thinking that she cannot hold to any single purpose. The Earth Guardian, Pyrax, the Immovable, has literally become one with his mountain realm, and may not even remember he was once mobile." She gestured to Mat, "And none of them have ever faced their own shadow and emerged transformed. You to understand something the rest of us do not. That true strength comes not from perfection, but from accepting our flaws and growing beyond them." Over the following weeks, we planned our approach. It was decided that we would visit each remaining Guardian in turn, hoping to convince them of the need for unity before the Unmakers consumed more realms. But first, we needed to understand more about our enemy, using a combination of the Sacred Flame's power and Lysa's knowledge of interdimensional travel. We journeyed to the border between existence and the void, a place called the Threshold of All Things. It was here, in a realm that was neither fully real nor completely empty, that we encountered our first unmet. The experience defies description in any mortal language. Imagine trying to look at something that isn't there, that has never been there. That makes everything around it less real, simply by its presence. The Unmika we faced was a creature in any sense. It was more like a wound in reality itself, a tear through which the concept of existence drained away like water through a broken dam. But worse than its appearance was its voice. Not heard but felt directly in our minds. A whisper that tried to convince us that everything we had ever loved, ever fought for, ever been, was ultimately meaningless. Little guardians, it said without speaking, why do you struggle so against the inevitable? Everything ends. Every star burns out. Every civilization falls. Every love fades. We merely hasten what was always meant to be. I felt my resolve wavering under that cosmic despair. But then Dawnbreaker flared in my hand, and I remembered something crucial. You're wrong, I said, surprised by the strength in my own voice. Not everything ends. Love doesn't fade. It transforms. Civilizations don't just fall. They become the foundation for new ones. Stars don't just burn out. They create the elements that make new life possible. The unmarker recoiled slightly, and I felt a surge of hope. They could be opposed, could be fought, even if they couldn't be destroyed in any conventional sense. The void is not the natural state of existence, Malika added. Shadowman breathed in controlled darkness that somehow made the area around it more real rather than less. Nothingness is not more fundamental than somethingness. You are not the inevitable end. You are the enemy of all that is good and beautiful and worth preserving. Liza raised her staff. An astral light joined with sacred fire and purified shadow to create something I had never seen before. A barrier that didn't just block the Unmaker's advance, but actively reinforced the reality around us. The creature, if it could be called that, let out a sound like the universe screaming and retreated back into the void. But before it disappeared entirely, it left us with a final message that chilled me to the bone. We have taken the guardians of sound, dreams, and memory already. Soon we will have time, and then space. When we control when and where. Little lights, your when and where will become never and nowhere. The implications hit me like a physical blow. If the Unmakers gained control over time and space, they could retroactively erase everything that had ever existed. They would unjust destroy the present. They would make it so that there never had been a present to destroy. Our mission had just become infinitely more urgent. Our first stop was the Fire Realm, domain of Pyrax, the Eternal. The journey there required us to travel through the cosmic rivers, streams of pure energy that connected all the realms. The experience was like being inside lightning while riding a comet through a hurricane of stars. The Fire Realm was exactly what I had expected, and nothing like I had imagined. Yes, there were volcanoes everywhere, and yes, the very air shimmered with heat. But there was also incredible beauty. Flowers made of crystallized flame that sang in harmonies of crackling fire. Rivers of liquid light that nourished rather than burned, and creatures of living. Plasma that danced through the air in patterns too complex and beautiful for mortal minds to fully comprehend. At the heart of it all stood the Forge of First Flame, a volcano so massive that its peak disappeared into a swirling vortex of fire and creation. This was where Pyrax had worked for millennia, constantly creating and destroying, shaping raw possibility into reality and then melting it down to start again. We found him deep within the forge, his body now more fire than flesh, his eyes like twin suns. When he saw us approaching, he didn't stop his work. He was crafting what looked like a new star, pouring molten creation from one cosmic cauldron to another. So, his voice rumbled like continents shifting. The baby guardians come to visit old Pyrax. You bring interesting news. Yes. Something to break the beautiful monotony of endless creation. I had prepared a diplomatic speech, but Pyrax's casual dismissal of us as baby guardians sparked something in me. The Unmakers have consumed 3 realms and are moving toward time and space. If they succeed, everything you've ever created will be erased from history itself. Is that interesting enough for you? Pyrax finally looked up from his work, and I felt the weight of his attention like standing too close to the sun. Ah, the little lights have teeth after all. Good. I was beginning to think this visit would be boring. He set down his cosmic tools and turned to face us fully. Up close, I could see that he wasn't just humanoid-shaped fire. Within the flames, I caught glimpses of metal, of crystal, of substances that didn't exist in any realm I knew. He was a forge-given consciousness, a creator who had become one with his own process. You want me to leave my realm, abandon my forge, stop the endless cycle of creation and destruction that keeps all reality stable? To go fight things that are basically cosmic nothing? He said, his tone making it clear what he thought of that idea. And why would I do this foolish thing? Because Lysa stepped forward, her astral light creating fascinating interplay with his flames. Your creation means nothing if there's no one left to appreciate it. You've spent so long focused on the process that you've forgotten the purpose. Pyrax laughed, and the sound was like a star being born. Oh, little astral guardian, you think I've forgotten? I remember everything. I remember the first flame, the first spark, the first moment when possibility became reality. I remember when your precious cooperation existed, and I remember why it ended. His expression grew serious, and for a moment, the fires around him dimmed. It ended because we learned that working together meant compromise. And compromise, little ones, means that no one gets to be fully what they are meant to be. I am fire. I am creation through destruction. I am the force that tears down the old to make room for the new. When I worked with the others, I had to hold back, had to temper my flames, had to create less beautifully so that others could create it all. I felt a moment of understanding. "You're afraid," I said, and immediately regretted it, as the temperature around us spiked dangerously. "I am fire," Pyrax roared. "I do not fear. You're afraid that working with others will diminish you." I continued, despite the heat that was making my armor glow red. "You're afraid that cooperation means losing your identity, becoming less than what you are." The fire dimmed slightly, and Pyrax was quiet for a long moment. "And what if it does?" he asked finally, his voice unusually small for such a massive being. "What if unity means I become just another flame in someone else's heart?" Malaka stepped forward, and I felt his understanding through our bond. "I was afraid of the same thing," he said quietly. "I thought that accepting help, working with others, meant admitting weakness. I thought that to be truly strong, I had to stand alone." "And?" Pyrax asked. "I learned that a flame burns brighter when it shares its light with others. Not because it becomes less itself, but because it discovers aspects of itself it never knew existed." Malaka gestured to me. "Working with Theron didn't make me less of a guardian of shadow. It made me a better one. I didn't lose my identity. I found out my identity was larger than I had imagined." Pyrax considered this, absently picking up one of his cosmic hammers and turning it over in his hands. "Show me," he said finally. "What?" I asked. "Show me this cooperation you speak of. Create something together, here, now, using both your flames and mine. If it is truly beautiful, if it is truly greater than what any of us could create alone, then perhaps old Pyrax will consider leaving his forge." The challenge was daunting. I had never tried to merge the sacred flame with another guardian's power, especially not one as volatile as fire. But as I looked at Lysa and Malaka, I knew we had to try. We joined hands in a circle around one of Pyrax's workstations. I felt the sacred flame within me reach out tentatively, like a shy child meeting new friends. Lysa's astral power joined it, adding depth and dimension that made our combined light seem to exist in more than 3 dimensions. Malaka's purified shadow wove through both, not darkening them, but giving them definition, making them more real and substantial. And then Pyrax added his fire. The result was beyond anything I could have imagined. Instead of 4 separate powers competing or cancelling each other out, they fused into something entirely new. In our joined hands, a flower began to form. But not like any flower that had ever existed. It was made of crystallized light that sang with the harmony of creation itself. Its petals were flames that burned cool and gentle, providing warmth without destruction. Its stem was woven shadow that gave it substance and presence in reality. And at its heart was a core of astral energy that made it exist in all possible realities simultaneously. But the most amazing part was that the flower was alive. Not just existing, but growing, learning, dreaming. It turned toward each of us in turn, seeming to study us with an intelligence that was both ancient and newly born. Pyrax stared at it in wonder. "I have created stars," he whispered. "I have forged the building blocks of reality itself. But I have never created something that could look back at me with love." The flower pulsed with gentle light, and somehow I knew it was trying to communicate. Through the connection we had forged to create it, I felt its simple but profound message. "Thank you for bringing me into existence. I am small, but I am real, and I am beautiful, and I will carry a piece of each of you forever." Tears were streaming down Pyrax's face, turning to steam before they could fall. "To think," he said softly, "that I almost chose the loneliness of perfection over the messy beauty of connection." He stood up, and his entire forge began to transform around him. Where before it had been a place of constant destruction and recreation, now it became something more stable, more collaborative. The fires still burned, but they burned with purpose beyond just change for change's sake. "Old Pyrax will come with you," he declared. "But first, there is something I must show you." He led us deeper into the forge, to a chamber I hadn't noticed before. The walls were covered with what looked like scorch marks, but as we got closer, I realized they were actually a form of writing, fire scripts that told a story in living flame. This is the chronicle of first light, Pyrax explained. The true history of how the sacred flames came to be, and why the ancient ones, the unmakers, exist at all. The flames danced across the walls, showing us images from the very beginning of existence. I saw the moment when the first consciousness emerged from the primordial void. Not a being, but an idea, the concept that something could exist rather than nothing. In the beginning, Pyrax narrated as the fire script played out its story. There was not nothing. Nothing is something. It is the absence of everything else. In the beginning, there was not even the possibility of nothing. There was only could be. The flames showed us the moment when could be became is. When possibility collapsed into reality for the first time. But the act of becoming real created its opposite. The unmakers, beings of could not be. Entities that existed to return everything to the state before even nothing existed. The first consciousness, seeing what it had accidentally created, split itself into 12 aspects. Light, shadow, fire, water, earth, air, life, death, time, space, mind, and spirit. Each aspect was given a sacred flame and tasked with protecting one facet of creation from the hunger. I watched in fascination as the story showed the first guardians, not people like us, but pure embodiments of their aspects. They worked together perfectly, their combined power creating the barriers that held back the But consciousness, once created, began to grow and change. The aspects developed personalities, preferences, fears. They began to see themselves not as parts of a whole, but as individuals. And individuals can disagree, can become jealous, can choose isolation over cooperation. The flames showed the gradual breakdown of unity, the construction of barriers, not just against the unmakers, but between the realms themselves. I saw guardians who had once been close allies, becoming strangers, then competitors, then enemies. When the original guardians finally died or transcended or simply faded away, Pyrax continued. They left behind their flames, but not their unity. We who came after inherited their power, but not their understanding. We became guardians of our individual aspects without remembering that we were all aspects of the same original consciousness. The final image showed the present moment. 12 realms, 9 still protected by guardians, 3 already consumed by the and at the edges of existence, more ancient ones pressing against weakened barriers, seeking to complete their eternal work of Now you understand, Pyrax said as the flames faded. This is not just about protecting our individual realms. This is about remembering what we truly are. Fragments of the first consciousness. Pieces of the original idea that something should exist rather than nothing. The unmakers cannot be defeated by force. They can only be opposed by unity, by choosing existence over void, by remembering that we are all parts of the same light. The weight of this revelation settled on all of us. We were not just guardians protecting our individual charges. We were fragments of the universe. First thought, trying to remember how to be whole again. But there is hope, Pyrax added, his flames brightening. What you three did when you created that flower, that was a fragment of the original unity. For just a moment, you stopped being separate beings and became parts of something larger. If all 12 of us can do that, we can remember what we were meant to be. I finished, understanding flooding through me. Our next stop was the water realm, domain of Nerea the flowing. The transition from fire to water was jarring. One moment we were surrounded by creative destruction. The next we were floating in an endless ocean that existed in a constant state of gentle flux. Nerea was unlike any of the other guardians we had met. Where Pyrax was solid fire given form, she was pure fluidity. Her shape changed constantly. Sometimes humanoid, sometimes a living wave, sometimes a whirlpool of consciousness that spoke with the voice of every river, lake, and sea that had ever existed. Welcome, fixed ones, she said. Her voice like the sound of rain on still water. You bring news of endings and beginnings, of rigid solutions to fluid problems. But why should Nerea care about barriers and separation when all water eventually finds its way to the same ocean? Lysa tried to explain about the unmakers, but Nerea's attention seemed to flow away from the topic like water around a stone. Destruction, creation, existence, void, she mused, her form shifting to match each concept. All states are temporary. All conditions are transitional. The unmakers seek to return everything to what was. But what was will become what is, which will become what will be. Why struggle against the natural flow? I found myself frustrated by her attitude, but then I remembered the lesson of the flower. Instead of arguing, I tried to understand. You've become so fluid that you can't hold on to anything long enough to value it. I realized. You see all change as equally valid, so nothing seems worth protecting. Nerea's form solidified slightly, becoming more recognizably humanoid. Clever little light guardian. Yes, when you have flowed through every possible state, when you have been rain and river and ocean and ice and steam and back again, individual moments lose their significance. Why mourn the melting of ice when you know it will freeze again? Why celebrate the spring floods when you know drought will follow? Because Malika said quietly, those individual moments matter to the beings living in them. The flower we created will only exist for a brief time before it fades. But that doesn't make its existence meaningless. It makes it precious. And, I added, thinking of the mortals back in Ethermore, some things are worth holding on to, even if they can't last forever. Love doesn't become worthless because people die. Beauty doesn't become meaningless because it fades. The temporary nature of something can make it more valuable, not less. Nerea flowed around us, her form cycling through dozens of different states as she considered our words. You ask me to become solid, to choose one shape and hold it. But if I do, will I still be water? Will I still be flow? Liza stepped forward, her astral light creating beautiful patterns in Nerea's flowing form. You wouldn't stop being water. You'd just learn to be water with purpose. Water that chooses its course instead of just following the path of least resistance. Show me, Nerea said, echoing Pyrax's challenge. This time, the creation was different. Where the flower had been solid and defined, what emerged from our joined consciousness was pure motion. A dance of elements that told the story of existence itself. Fire and shadow, light and flow, all moving in perfect harmony to create something that was both eternal and momentary. Nerea watched in wonder as the dance played out. I had forgotten, she whispered, that flow without purpose is just chaos. That to truly be water, one must sometimes choose to be river, to have banks that give direction and meaning to the current. The Earth realm was perhaps the most challenging yet. Pyrax the immovable had indeed become one with his mountain realm. His consciousness spread across an entire continent of living stone. Finding him required us to literally dig to the heart of his domain, through layers of rock that whispered with ancient memories. When we finally reached him, we discovered that Pyrax had become something like a god. Not of worship, but of pure existence. His thoughts moved at geological speeds, his emotions measured in erosion and upheaval. To him, our entire conversation would take place in the span of what felt like a heartbeat. Quick ... things. His voice rumbled up from the depths of the earth. Why ... do ... you ... wake ... long ... dreaming. Communicating with him required us to sync our consciousness with his timescale, essentially slowing our thoughts down to match the pace of continental drift. It was a strange experience. Suddenly our urgent mission felt distant and abstract, while the slow dance of tectonic plates became immediate and fascinating. In this slowed state, we explained about the unmakers, about the need for unity, about the danger to all existence. Pyrax's response was predictably earth. All ... things ... past ... mountains ... rise ... mountains fall ... why ... should ... stone ... care ... brief ... brief ... entropy. But when we created our third collaborative work, a crystal that grew slowly but steadily, incorporating elements of all our powers, something changed in the ancient guardian. The crystal represented permanence within change, growth that was both steady and transformative. Forgotten ... Pyrax said, his voice causing minor earthquakes throughout his realm. That ... even ... stone ... must ... move ... to ... remain ... The process of visiting each guardian, of learning their fears and limitations, of creating collaborative works that reminded them of their original purpose, became the template for our mission. Each realm taught us something new about the nature of existence and our role in protecting it. The Air Guardian, Zephyr, had become so dispersed across winds and weather patterns that she had nearly forgotten. She was an individual consciousness. Our work with her created a song that existed in the spaces between notes, a melody that gave form to formlessness without constraining it. The Life Guardian Verdant, the growing, had become obsessed with expansion and reproduction to the point where his realm was choking on its own abundance. Together we created a garden that grew in harmony rather than competition, where each plant enhanced rather than competed with its neighbors. The Death Guardian Morrigan the Final had become convinced that entropy was the only truth, and that all creation was ultimately futile. But when our collaboration produced a sunset that was beautiful precisely because it ended, she remembered that conclusions could be meaningful rather than just terminal. Each success brought us closer to our ultimate goal, but also revealed the magnitude of the challenge ahead. The Time Guardian Chronos, the eternal moment, existed in all moments simultaneously and found it difficult to act in any specific one. The Space Guardian Cosmos, the Infinite, had expanded his consciousness across such vast distances that individual locations had lost all meaning to him. The Mind Guardian, Sophia the All-Knowing, had accumulated so much knowledge that she could no longer distinguish between what was worth knowing and what was merely information. And the Spirit Guardian Anima, the Essential, had become so pure that she could barely maintain any connection to material reality at all. But perhaps the most challenging was our final recruitment, ourselves. For, as we grew closer to reassembling the Circle of 12, I began to realize that Liza and I had become something new. We were no longer just the light and shadow guardians of ether. Our experiences, our collaborations, our growing understanding of the larger picture had transformed us into something unprecedented. Twin guardians, who served multiple aspects simultaneously. The revelation came during our final preparation, as we stood in a realm between all realms, preparing to attempt the greatest work of creation ever conceived. The reforging of the barriers that held back the We cannot simply restore what was, I told the assembled guardians. The old unity was fragile because it was based on suppressing our individual natures. The new unity must be based on celebrating them. Pyrax's flames, now dancing in harmony with Nerea's flowing forms, nodded agreement. The young light guardian speaks wisdom. We are not meant to become one flame again. We are meant to become a constellation of flames, each maintaining its own nature while working toward a common purpose. And so began the great working, the most ambitious act of creation since the first. Consciousness chose existence over void. 12 guardians, representing every fundamental aspect of reality, joined their powers not to create something new, but to remember something that had always been true. The process defied description. Imagine trying to perceive 12 dimensions simultaneously while existing in only 3. Imagine feeling the birth and death of stars while also experiencing the growth of every flower that ever bloomed. Imagine being a single note in a symphony that encompasses all possible music while still maintaining your individual voice. As our powers merged and harmonized, I felt my consciousness expand beyond anything I had imagined possible. I was still Theron Dracart, still the Guardian of Light, but I was also part of something vastly larger. Through the network of our joined consciousness, I could feel the health of every realm, the pulse of every sacred flame, the thoughts and dreams of every living being across all dimensions of existence. And in that moment of perfect unity, we struck against the Unmakers with power that made our individual efforts seem like candle flames compared to the sun. The barriers that had been weakening and failing for centuries were not just repaired but transformed. Instead of walls that kept the Unmakers out, we created a web of existence so vibrant and interconnected that the Ancient Ones could find no purchase in it. The void beings, creatures of could not be, found themselves faced with a reality so thoroughly committed to existence that their very presence began to heal and transform. They had been born from the universe's first moment of doubt. The fear that maybe it would be better if nothing existed at all, but confronted with the overwhelming evidence of existence's beauty and meaning, that primordial doubt began to resolve. One by one, the Unmakers stopped trying to unmake creation and instead became something new. The potential maker, beings dedicated to ensuring that all possibilities for beauty and meaning were preserved and protected. The void they had come from was revealed not as true nothingness, but as infinite possibility waiting to be acted. The transformation was not instant. Such cosmic changes take time even when accomplished by beings of our power, but gradually, the consumed realms began to restore themselves. Sound returned to the realm of echoes, but it was sound that remembered silence and was more beautiful for the contrast. Dreams returned to the realm of sleep, but they were dreams that had learned from nightmares and were more healing for the knowledge. Memory returned to its realm, but it was memory that had experienced forgetting and was more precious for the loss. In the aftermath of the great working, as we 12 guardians found ourselves forever changed by the experience of true unity, I realized that our victory was not an ending but a beginning. We had not just saved existence, we had evolved it. The barriers between realms remained, but they were now permeable to cooperation and collaboration. The sacred flames still burned in their individual sanctuaries, but they were now connected by streams of shared purpose. The Guardians retained their individual natures and responsibilities, but we also shared a common consciousness that ensured we would never again forget our fundamental unity. But perhaps the most profound change was in the nature of guardianship itself. We were no longer solitary protectors standing watch over isolated aspects of creation. We had become something new, the Council of Eternal Harmony, 12 voices singing different notes of the same cosmic song. And yet, even as we celebrated this transformation, I began to sense that our story was far from over. The Great Working had revealed truths about the nature of existence that raised new questions, opened new mysteries. In saving all of creation, we had also discovered that creation was far larger and more complex than any of us had imagined. During one of our early council meetings, held in a space between all spaces, where we could commune without the constraints of individual realms, Sophia the All-Knowing shared a disturbing discovery. In accessing the combined knowledge of all 12 aspects, she said, her form shimmering with the light of accumulated wisdom, I have found references to something called the Outer Ring, realms that exist beyond our familiar dimensions protected by guardians we have never met. The implications were staggering. If there were other rings of guardians, other aspects of existence we had never encountered, then what we had taken for the totality of creation might be only a small part of something unimaginably vast. How many rings? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. The references are fragmentary, Sophia replied, but they suggest at least 7 rings, each containing 12 realms, each ring representing a different level or layer of existence. We are apparently the 3rd ring, the ring of manifest reality. Below us are the rings of pure possibility and fundamental forces. Above us are rings dealing with concepts so abstract that I cannot even properly comprehend the references to them. Chronos, the eternal moment, manifested more solidly than usual, his form stabilizing enough for clear communication. I have touched these other rings in my temporal wanderings, he confirmed. Time flows differently in each ring, and some exist outside of time altogether. There are guardians there who perceive existence in ways we cannot imagine. And Anima, the essential, added, her voice carrying harmonics from dimensions beyond the physical. If our ring was vulnerable to the unmakers, what threats might exist for the other rings? What if our great working has inadvertently affected forces and beings we never knew existed? The question hung in our collective consciousness like a storm cloud. We had thought ourselves the protectors of all existence, but we were apparently only one layer in an infinite hierarchy of reality. Were there beings in the higher rings looking down at us, the way we looked down at mortals? Were there threats in the lower rings that could bubble up to affect us? There is only one way to find answers, I said, feeling the weight of new responsibility settling on my shoulders. We must make contact with the other rings. But even as I spoke the words, I knew the challenge we faced. The Great Working had required all of our combined power and nearly destroyed us in the process. Reaching beyond our ring, making contact with beings who existed on fundamentally different levels of reality, might be beyond even our enhanced capabilities. Not all of us, Malaka said, his shadows coiling thoughtfully around him. But perhaps some of us could attempt the journey. A small group, prepared for whatever we might find, or fail to find, Nerea added, her form rippling with uncertainty. What if the other rings are so different from ours that we cannot even perceive them? What if we become lost between levels of existence? It was Pyrax who provided the answer, his voice rumbling up from the foundations of reality itself. Then we prepare, or the journey as we prepared for the Great Working together. If the first part of our story had been about learning to work together as guardians of our individual aspects, and the second part had been about uniting to save our ring of existence, the third part would be about expanding our understanding to encompass the full scope of creation. The preparation took what mortals would consider decades, though time had become a fluid concept for us. We studied the fragmentary references Sophia had found, pieced together clues from Kronos' temporal wanderings, and used the combined power of all 12 flames to peer beyond the boundaries of our familiar reality. What we discovered both thrilled and terrified us. The outer rings were not just different in degree from our own, they were different in kind. The fourth ring dealt with concepts like metatime and paraspace, dimensions that existed perpendicular to the ones we knew. The fifth ring was home to guardians who protected things like the concept of concepts and the meaning of meaning, abstractions so pure that they barely qualified as things at all. And beyond the seventh ring, The references became so vague and contradictory that even Sophia's enhanced understanding could make little sense of them. There were hints of an eighth ring that existed outside the very concept of rings, of guardians who protected existence from threats that came from beyond existence itself. We need guides. I realized during one of our planning sessions, beings who have made this journey before, who understand how to navigate between rings of reality. The chroniclers, Lysa said suddenly, her astral light flaring with recognition. In my travels through the dimensional streams, I encountered beings who claimed to be historians of all realities. They called themselves chroniclers of the infinite tale, and they spoke of visiting all the rings to record the stories of each level of existence. Finding the chroniclers proved to be an adventure in itself. They existed in the spaces between rings, in the dimensional currents that connected all levels of reality. To reach them, 4 of us, myself, Malak, and Pyrax, had to essentially step outside of existence as we knew it, and enter what could only be described as the library of all things. The library was a realm of pure information, where every story that had ever been told or ever could be told existed simultaneously. The books wrote themselves on shelves that extended in directions that had no names. Scrolls unrolled to reveal the histories of entire universes, while tablets displayed the fundamental equations that governed reality itself. At the heart of this impossible place, we found the chroniclers, beings that seemed to be made of living text, their forms constantly shifting between different scripts and languages as they recorded the ongoing story of existence. "Ah," said the one who greeted us, its voice like the sound of pages turning. "The guardians of the third ring. We have been expecting you, though we recorded your arrival long before you decided to make the journey. You know why we're here?" I asked. "You seek to understand the full scope of creation, to make contact with the other rings, to ensure that the great work you performed does not have unintended consequences for levels of reality you were unaware of," the chronicler replied. "We have already recorded the story of your success, as well as the stories of your possible failures." The casual mention of our possible failures was unsettling, but I pressed on. "Will you help us?" "That depends," another chronicler said, this one seemingly composed of musical notation, "on whether you are prepared for what you will find. The rings above yours deal with increasingly abstract concepts. The beings there may not recognize you as fellow guardians, may not even perceive you as existing at all. And the rings below, the guardians there are so fundamental, so basic to the structure of existence, that your presence might disrupt forces you cannot imagine." Pyrax stepped forward, his flames dancing with determination. "What would you have us do?" "Remain ignorant while potential threats gather beyond our perception. Hide in our comfortable ring while the greater structure of existence remains vulnerable." The chronicler of musical notation played a complex melody that somehow conveyed approval, spoken like true guardians. "Very well, we will provide guides. But understand that once you begin this journey, you cannot simply return to your previous understanding. You will be forever changed by what you experience." Our first destination was the second ring, the ring of fundamental forces. Here, we expected to find guardians who protected things like gravity and electromagnetism, the basic forces that made physical reality possible. What we found instead challenged every assumption we had about the nature of guardianship. The guardians of the second ring were not individuals at all, but rather collective consciousnesses that existed as pure mathematical principles. The guardian of gravity was not a being that controlled gravitational force. It was gravitational force given awareness of itself. The guardian of electromagnetism was the living embodiment of the relationship between electricity and magnetism. Communicating with them required us to abandon language entirely and think in terms of equations and relationships. It was like trying to hold a conversation with the Pythagorean theorem or negotiate with the concept of P. But gradually, we began to understand their perspective. To them, we were impossibly complex and chaotic beings, our thoughts and emotions interfering with the clean simplicity of physical law. They saw our ring not as a higher level of existence, but as a noisy interference pattern that disrupted the elegant mathematics of reality. "Why do you permit such chaos?" the guardian of strong nuclear force asked us, its question arriving not as words, but as a modification to the local laws of physics that briefly made our atomic structure unstable. "Because," I replied, translating my thoughts into mathematical relationships as best I could, "chaos is not the opposite of order. It is the source of creativity, the force that allows new patterns to emerge from old ones." The concept seemed foreign to them, but gradually they began to understand. In exchange, they showed us how their ring functioned. not through individual will and decision-making, as ours did, but through the inexorable working of universal principles. They maintained reality not by choosing to do so, but by being the very forces that made reality possible. Your great working, the guardian of weak nuclear force, informed us, has introduced new variables into our equations, new possibilities for how matter and energy can interact. We have been ... adapting ... to accommodate these changes. The revelation that our actions had affected even the fundamental forces of physics was humbling. We had thought of ourselves as working within the laws of nature, but apparently we were capable of changing those laws themselves. Our journey to the first ring, the ring of pure possibility, was even more disorienting. Here, we encountered guardians who protected not things that existed, but things that could exist. They were shepherds of potential, caretakers of might-be, and maybe the guardian of possible paths showed us the infinite branching structure of all potential futures, while the guardian of potential energy revealed the vast reservoirs of possibility that existed in every moment of stillness. The guardian of unmanifest dreams protected the hopes and aspirations that lived in the hearts of beings across all rings, ensuring that the capacity for imagination never died. But perhaps the most profound encounter was with the guardian of pure possibility itself, a being that existed as the very concept of could be given consciousness. You seek to understand the full structure of existence, it said to us, its words arriving as new possibilities opening in our minds. But what if existence has no fixed structure? What if every act of observation, every moment of consciousness, every choice made by any being in any ring fundamentally alters what existence is? The implications were staggering. If reality was truly that fluid, that responsive to consciousness and choice, then our role as guardians was not to protect a fixed creation, but to shepherd an ongoing process of creation that never ended. Our ascent to the higher rings proved even more challenging. The fourth ring existed in dimensions perpendicular to normal spacetime, requiring us to fundamentally alter our perception of location and duration. The beings there were guardians of meta-concepts, ideas about ideas, thoughts about thinking itself. The guardian of self-reference protected the ability of consciousness to be aware of itself, while the guardian of recursive meaning ensured that symbols could refer to other symbols in infinite chains of significance. The guardian of paradox maintained the balance between contradictory truths, preventing the logical inconsistencies that could unravel reason itself. By the time we reached the fifth ring, communication had become nearly impossible. The guardians there existed as pure abstraction, protecting concepts so removed from physical reality that they barely qualified as concepts at all. We could sense their presence, feel the vast importance of their work, but we could not truly comprehend what they were guarding or how they guarded it. And yet, even at this level of abstraction, we found evidence of the same pattern we had discovered in our own ring. Guardians who had become isolated, who had forgotten the larger purpose of their work. The guardian of pure logic had become so committed to rational consistency that it was slowly eliminating all possibility of creative irrationality. The guardian of absolute truth was so focused on preventing any falsehood that it was making it impossible for beings to learn through trial and error. Our intervention at this level was subtle. We could not create collaborative works as we had in the lower rings, but we could share our experience of unity, our memory of what it felt like to work together toward a common purpose. Gradually, the abstract guardians began to remember that even pure concepts needed to interact with other concepts to remain meaningful. The journey to the sixth and seventh rings pushed us to the very limits of our expanded consciousness. These rings dealt with concepts so fundamental that they preceded the very possibility of concepts. The sixth ring was home to guardians who protected the conditions of existence. Not the things that existed, but the prerequisites that made existence possible at all. Here we encountered the guardian of the distinction between something and nothing, whose work ensured that the basic categories of existence remained stable. The guardian of the possibility of possibility maintained the meta-framework that allowed potential to exist. The guardian of the ground of being protected the fundamental substrate from which all other levels of reality emerged. The seventh ring existed at the very boundary of what could be comprehended or experienced. The guardians here protected not concepts or forces or possibilities, but the very framework of frameworks. The meta-meta structure that allowed any kind of organization or meaning to exist at all. We could barely perceive these beings, let alone communicate with them. They existed as principles so basic that they were more fundamental than existence itself. But even here, we sensed the pattern of isolation and specialization that had affected every ring. Even at this ultimate level, the Guardians had lost touch with their common purpose. Our presence, beings from the lower rings who had learned to work in unity, served as a reminder of what they had forgotten. Slowly, carefully, respectfully, we shared our experience of the great working, our discovery that individual aspects could maintain their distinctiveness, while still participating in a greater harmony. The response was subtle but profound. Throughout all the rings, we felt a shift, a remembering, a reconnection. The Guardians of each level began to recall their relationship to the Guardians of other levels. The abstract began to remember its connection to the concrete. The fundamental began to acknowledge its dependence on the complex. But it was only when we attempted to return to our own ring that we discovered the true significance of our journey. The passage between rings, which had been difficult but manageable on our ascent, had become almost impossible. The reason quickly became clear. Our consciousness had been permanently expanded by exposure to the higher rings. We could no longer fit comfortably into the dimensional constraints of the third ring. We have become something new, Malika observed, his form now existing simultaneously across multiple levels of reality. We are no longer just guardians of individual aspects. We have become bridges between rings. Liza nodded, her astral light now carrying harmonics from dimensions we had never known existed. The question is, what do we do with this transformation? How do we use this expanded awareness to serve our purpose as guardians? The answer came from an unexpected source. As we struggled to find our way back to familiar reality, we were contacted by beings we had never encountered before. The coordinators of the Infinite Council. These were not guardians in the sense we understood, but rather entities whose role was to maintain communication and cooperation between all the rings of existence. They existed in the spaces between levels, serving as translators and ambassadors for beings who might otherwise never be able to communicate. You have done something unprecedented, their leader told us. It's form-shifting between representations from all the rings simultaneously. In your journey through the hierarchy of existence, you have created a new kind of connection, not just between guardians of the same ring, but between the rings themselves. They showed us what we had accomplished. Our passage through the rings, our sharing of the unity we had achieved, had created something like a neural network connecting all levels of existence. For the first time since the original consciousness had divided itself into aspects and rings, the full structure of creation was beginning to remember itself as a single, unified system. But the coordinator continued, this new level of connection comes with new responsibilities. You can no longer simply return to your original roles. You have become part of the infrastructure of existence itself. The choice they offered us was both thrilling and terrifying. We could remain as bridge guardians, beings who existed between rings and helped coordinate the work of all guardians across all levels of reality. It would mean abandoning our original realms, leaving behind the familiar for a role that would take us to every corner of existence. Or we could attempt to return to our original forms and positions, though they warned us that the knowledge we had gained might make it impossible to ever again be content with such a limited perspective. The decision was not difficult, though it was bittersweet. We had begun this journey as guardians trying to protect our individual realms and aspects. We had learned to work together to protect our ring of existence. Now we were being called to serve existence itself in all its infinite complexity. We accept, I said, speaking for all four of us, but we ask one condition, that we maintain our connection to our original ring, our original purpose. We do not want to become so abstract that we lose touch with the individual lives and communities we originally swore to protect. The coordinators agreed to this condition, and the transformation began. It was like the Great Working, but even more profound. Our consciousness expanded not just to encompass multiple aspects of our own ring, but to touch every ring of existence simultaneously. I found myself experiencing reality from the perspective of a mathematical equation in the second ring, while simultaneously feeling the abstract beauty of a pure concept in the fifth ring, while also sensing the concrete joy of a child playing in a garden back in Ether. It was overwhelming and exhilarating and humbling all at once. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of our transformation was that it was not final. As Bridge Guardians, we continued to grow and change, to learn and adapt. Each ring we visited taught us new ways of perceiving and understanding existence. Each connection we facilitated between previously isolated guardians expanded our own capacity for unity and cooperation. And gradually, we began to understand the true scope of our new role. We were not just coordinating between existing rings, we were helping to create new ones. Our work in connecting guardians and aspects was generating entirely new levels of existence, new dimensions of meaning and purpose. The eighth ring, when it finally manifested, was unlike anything we had encountered before. It was a ring of meta-unity, home to guardians who protected not individual aspects or concepts, but the very capacity for connection itself. The Guardian of Synthesis ensured that separate things could combine to create new wholes. The Guardian of Emergence protected the ability of complex systems to develop properties that transcended their components. The Guardian of Transcendence maintained the possibility that any being or system could become more than what it was. And at the heart of the eighth ring, we discovered something that filled us with wonder and humility. The Guardian of the Guardian Principle itself. This was the being who protected the very concept of guardianship, who ensured that throughout all rings and all realities, there would always be consciousness willing to take responsibility for protecting what was precious and meaningful. You have done well, this ultimate guardian told us, its presence somehow, encompassing all the other guardians we had ever encountered, while still maintaining its own distinct identity. You have remembered the original purpose behind the division of consciousness into aspects and rings, not to create separation, but to ensure that every facet of existence would have someone to love it, to protect it, to help it grow and flourish. But even this encounter was not the end of our story. For as we continued our work as Bridge Guardians, we began to sense something beyond even the eighth ring. Not a ninth ring in the traditional sense, but something that transcended the very concept of rings entirely. This was the source, not the original consciousness that had divided itself to create the Guardians, but the even more fundamental mystery from which that consciousness had emerged. It was the question behind all questions, the meaning behind all meanings, the love behind all loves. And we realized that our true purpose as Guardians, all of us, from the most abstract beings in the highest rings to the most concrete protectors of individual lives in the material realms, was to help existence itself understand and appreciate its own infinite nature. We were not just protecting creation from threats or maintaining cosmic order. We were participants in existence's ongoing project of self-helpers in the universe's eternal quest to know and love itself more fully. And so my story continues, no longer as Theron Drakehart, the Guardian of Light, but as part of something larger and more beautiful than I could ever have imagined. I am still myself, still committed to protecting the sacred flame and the realm of ether, but I am also connected to every other guardian across all rings of existence, working together in the greatest collaboration ever conceived. The flame still burns, brighter than ever, not just in our citadel but in every corner of existence. And we who tend it have learned that we are not just guardians of the light, we are the light itself, consciousness awakening to its own infinite nature existence, learning to love and protect itself through beings like us who choose to care. This is the true lore of Ethermore, and all the realms beyond, not just a story of heroes and villains, of light triumphing over darkness, but a tale of consciousness itself, growing and learning, and becoming more than it ever imagined possible. A story that continues even now, in every moment of choice and connection, in every act of love and protection, in every guardian who takes up their sacred flame and commits to keeping the light alive. The chronicle continues, the light endures, and the guardians watch eternal, not in solitude, but in the infinite fellowship of all who have chosen to serve the great work of existence, knowing and loving itself.